Before the first dawn broke, before a single star blinked into existence, there was a darkness that swallowed the earth. A darkness not of creation, but of ruin. The Bible's opening words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," seem to promise a pristine start. But the very next verse whispers a forbidden truth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. This isn't a blank canvas awaiting God's brush. It's a battlefield, scarred by a war erased from memory. What cataclysm shattered a world before Adam ever drew breath? What rebellion tore the heavens apart before the first man walked Eden? Stay with us until the end, because the truth hidden in these ancient verses will shake the foundation of everything you thought you knew about the beginning. If this stirs your soul, like, share, and subscribe to uncover the secrets buried in Scripture. Imagine a world not yet ours, where rivers of light flowed instead of water, where mountains stood not on rock but on foundations of crystal, radiant as thrones in the heavens. This was the first earth, a creation pulsing with divine order, its rhythms set to a sacred calendar of 364 days, each season aligned with the heartbeat of the Creator. The Book of Jubilees speaks of this realm, a place where time itself was an altar, where cycles of days and festivals bound earth to heaven in perfect harmony. But this world, luminous and holy, was not destined to endure. Genesis 1:2 drops us into a scene of desolation. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. In the ancient Hebrew, tohu vabohu, these are not gentle words. They scream of ruin, of a land laid waste, as Isaiah and Jeremiah used them to describe divine judgment's aftermath. This isn't the birth of a planet. It's the wreckage of one already broken. The question burns. What catastrophe could unmake a world before Adam's first breath? The answer lies in whispers from ancient texts, buried for millennia, now clawing their way to light. In this primeval world, the Watchers stood as heaven's sentinels. These were no ordinary angels. They were celestial guardians, their faces glowing with the light of the stars, their voices carrying the weight of thunder. Tasked by the Most High, they descended to guide humanity's infancy, teaching the sacred rhythms of time, days, Sabbaths, jubilees, that kept creation in sync with God's throne. Picture them walking among men, their presence a bridge between heaven and earth, their authority unquestioned as they instructed tribes in righteousness and the keeping of God's calendar. The Book of Jubilees tells of their mission, to preserve the divine order, to ensure every festival fell on its appointed day, every season aligned with heaven's design. Time was no mere measurement. It was a covenant woven into creation's fabric. To keep it was to dwell in God's will. To break it was to invite chaos. The Watchers were the keepers of this sacred clock, the guardians of a world still learning to walk in the Creator's light. But even heaven's messengers are not immune to temptation. On the shadowed slopes of Mount Hermon, the Watchers gathered in secret. The Book of Enoch reveals their chilling decision. Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men and beget us children. This was no fleeting desire. It was a deliberate rebellion, sealed with an oath that bound them not to God, but to one another. They craved more than guidance. They hungered for dominion, to fuse heaven's glory with earth's flesh and create a lineage of their own. From this forbidden union came the Nephilim, giants of unimaginable might, their footsteps shaking the earth, their violence staining it red. These were no mere men. They were hybrids of angel and human, their existence a defiance of God's order. The Watchers didn't stop there. They poured forbidden knowledge into human hands, secrets of war, sorcery, and the stars twisted for manipulation. What was meant to be a gift became a curse. Festivals honoring the Creator were replaced with idol worship. Sabbaths were forgotten in the pursuit of power. The divine rhythm of time unraveled, and with it, the world itself began to fracture. The earth groaned under the weight of this rebellion. Cities of the Nephilim rose, their towers defiant against the heavens. Humanity, seduced by the Watchers' teachings, drifted from covenant to chaos, worshiping the might of giants over the Most High. The Book of Jubilees warns that to disrupt God's appointed times is to tear the threads of creation itself. And so the verdict came, not as a whisper, but as a roar. Genesis 7:11 paints a scene of cosmic upheaval. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. This was no ordinary rain. It was a deluge of divine wrath, waters roaring from above and below, swallowing the Nephilim cities, forests, and pride in a flood that remade the earth. But the judgment didn't end on the ground. In the heavens, a second tribunal convened. The Book of Enoch describes the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, binding the rebel Watchers in chains of darkness, casting them into an abyss where their cries could no longer reach the throne they once served. This was a dual reckoning. The flood cleansed the earth, while the chains purged the heavens. Peter's epistle captures its weight. God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. Two realms, one decree. The world before Adam was unmade, its ruins buried beneath water and silence, its betrayers locked away. Yet even this cataclysm couldn't erase every trace of rebellion. When Noah's Ark settled on Ararat, the world seemed new, clean, quiet, reborn. But Genesis 6:4 carries a haunting echo. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Somehow, their legacy survived. By the time Israel reached Canaan, the spies trembled, reporting, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in their sight." Numbers 13:33. The Anakim, Rephaim, giants of old, stood as living reminders of a rebellion that refused to die. This wasn't just a physical threat. It was a spiritual gauntlet, a test for God's people to confront the shadow of an ancient war. The prophets saw it. Amos spoke of giants falling under God's judgment. The psalmist celebrated the defeat of Og, whose bed stretched over 13 feet. These weren't mere battles. They were clashes in a cosmic struggle that began before Eden. The Nephilim's shadow lingers not just in flesh, but in humanity's endless hunger for power beyond God's boundaries, through science, occultism, or the worship of might over righteousness. The story of the world before Adam isn't a dusty relic. It's a mirror held up to our own age. The Watchers' crimes, distorting time, peddling forbidden knowledge, exalting power over covenant, echo in our world. Our calendars chase profit, not God's rhythms. Our knowledge, untethered from reverence, becomes a tool for control. Our heroes, like the Nephilim, are often celebrated for strength divorced from righteousness. Jesus warned, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." Matthew 24:37. The patterns are forming again. The book of Revelation glimpses the final act, a world where boundaries blur, where rebellion rises, where judgment falls on both earth and heaven. The Watcher's influence, like a contagion, still moves through history, whispering of power, of knowledge, of a world unshackled from God's design. But the same God who judged then is watching now, gathering a people to stand faithful when the next storm breaks. The world before Adam lies in ruins, its story buried beneath the waves of a forgotten flood, its rebels chained in a darkness that still echoes with their defiance. Yet, this isn't just a tale of a shattered past. It's a warning carved into the foundation of our own time. The patterns of rebellion, distorted time, forbidden knowledge, power untethered from righteousness, are rising again. Jesus himself warned, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." The stage is set. The shadows of the Watchers and Nephilim linger in our world's hunger for control, in our drift from God's covenant. But there is hope. The ark of this age is not wood and pitch, but a promise sealed in the blood of the Lamb, open to all who choose faithfulness over rebellion. Will you stand vigilant, aligned with the Creator's design, or be swept away when the final judgment falls? The choice is yours, and the time is now. If this story has stirred your heart, like, comment, and subscribe to journey deeper into the truths hidden in Scripture. Stay with us, because the next page of history is already turning.